Today we're visiting Abi Reader's dairy farm in the Vale of Glamorgan. We're here to have a conversation with Abi about the roles and the challenges for farmers for Welsh agriculture at a time when we are hearing so much about the climate emergency and the crisis in biodiversity.
I'm Abi Reader. I'm third generation here on the farm, and I currently work with my father and my mother and my uncle on the farm. We're mainly dairy, but we do also do sheep. We've got some beef and we do a bit of arable as well.
I think a good place to start really is we're talking about climate emergency, the climate crisis, the IPC report. We've got less than 10 years to hit all these carbon reduction targets. In general, how do farmers see that, and what sort of measures are they taking?
The main issue for farmers when we're thinking about the climate crisis is obviously we seem to end up with this whole livestock versus plants diet, which is particularly frustrating here in Wales. We've got some of the best land that you could ask for in Wales here, and yet there are still places on my farm where we couldn't possibly grow arable crops, and we know because we've tried. And there are places where we've got the bedrock that's that far below the surface, and there are equally places where the bedrock is proud above the surface by a foot or more. Even if we wanted to go down the plant route, we're going to struggle.
Given this acceptance of these targets that we have to meet across all different sectors, and with livestock dairy in particular, there is this argument that we want people to eat less meat but better meat, and for me that would mean more localised meat. Obviously, as a livestock producer and a representative of the dairy industry, can you see farmers, the agricultural sector, ever sort of accepting that possibly is part of the way forward?
I don't like it because obviously it is discouraging people from eating meat. However, if you want to look at it in a more collaborative way, could people just eat British meat? And it is better. We have some of the world leading animal welfare standards. Our environmental standards are equally world leading, but more specifically than that, they're set and controlled by us. If we allow meat that is cheaper to come in from other places that don't reach our standards, hence the reason it is cheaper, our people who are doing their shopping or eating out, if they don't perceive there's a problem with a product, what's going to make them pick up the British one that promises to be environmentally friendly and promises to meet our welfare standards? What's going to make them pick that up if it's more expensive? And that's what worries me. We are going to have a certain amount of protection for us and for the public, because if it's British, it's safer.
So do you think this highlights a lack of awareness, perhaps a problem with education, that people aren't aware where their food's produced, how it's produced, who's producing it? Do you think we need a greater connection between communities and food producers?
It's probably more than education. It's really just trying to draw people back into our communities, and we're not these strange people that live on the fringes and live in the middle of nowhere. We are part of society, and we do welcome other people's values and opinions, and trying to get them to think of farmers as people they can trust to produce the food that they want to take home and put on their tables in front of their families. We've touched on the need to reduce carbon emissions. Do you see a role for farmers, for the agricultural sector, in things like carbon sequestration, perhaps more tree planting schemes, hedgerows? We're probably the only industry that can take carbon out of the atmosphere. We will emit X amount, but equally we can take X amount back in. That will come in grass, so that's the pasture that our animals eat. That will come in trees, very important, and it will come in hedges. The trees one always pops up, and the reason it makes us as farmers nervous is because if you're planting trees, how do you earn a living from them? Some of them will take 25 to 30 years to grow. And if it goes wrong and you get 10 years down the road and suddenly nobody wants those trees, or maybe they get a disease or something, you're in an even worse mess, and you've probably destroyed the soils that were so valuable for providing food. That's the problem with the tree thing. In addition to the climate crisis, we're also obviously in the middle of a biodiversity crisis, a nature crisis, with 1 in 6 species in Wales threatened with extinction. Do you see scope for farmers engaging more with schemes to promote biodiversity and habitat preservation? Yeah, I think you would struggle to find any farmer that would disagree with that. We love seeing the birds, we love seeing the insects, and a lot of them have quite a large amount of value in helping us to grow the food that we grow. So we just need smart thinking on how to do it. So quite often we will get advice that will come via government, and we will change things on the farm. And then we get a few years down the road and we realise that actually that change hasn't been for the better. and it's been at the detriment of, say, some wildflowers or something, and we've had personal experience of that. So we absolutely welcome it. It's just trying to work out what are the best bits to do, and don't blame us if it goes wrong. You know, as long as we're all part of that conversation, we can give it a go.
There is a lack of perception, something missing from the conversation. Do you think, I mean, you obviously there's a lot of polarised debate, and do you think farmers react defensively to this, that you have people standing on one side just wagging their fingers, sort of say, you're the problem, you're the cause of the problem?
The key thing people aren't getting are the communities. So when we have all this farmer bashing and being accused that we're killing the planet, or we're being cruel to our animals, or you know, whatever it may be, we're stealing money off people, it's taken very personally. And farms aren't like shops or factories. You don't shut the door on them at the end of the day and go home. Quite often there are generations of people living on that farm. So when you're making that attack, and it's a personal attack, it's not just personal on yourself as the farmer, it becomes personal on your family. And as we all know, when people start to attack our families, we get even more protective and even more primal, and that's just the way it is. So it's trying to remind people that we are human behind it all, and anything that happens within our community creates, well, but to one farm, creates this ripple effect throughout the entire community, and it bruises us all. And it's just reminding people that, you know, we're so interwoven with one another. And that's why sometimes we find it difficult to speak to people about it.
Many people would see part of the problem here in the sector is coming from sort of industrial farming, or intensive farming, for want of a better word, big agribusiness. Do you think it's fair, I mean, the proposal that perhaps the polluter pays principle works, and industrial scale farming should be paying for the cost of the environmental damage it causes?
When we talk about industrial farming or factory farming, this is a real bit of a bugbear for me. In that I never really understand what people mean. So I can understand the extremes. So you've got, on the one hand, the person who's got maybe 4 or 5 cows, and on the other hand, you've got the other person who's got 4,000 or 5,000 cows. But every farm, every business is going to get bigger as time goes on. My grandfather milked 12 cows. By the time he died, we were milking 60 cows. It's all because our business is growing and developing, and we're trying to get economies of scale, and we're trying to stay ahead of the cost. So society needs to decide at what point it thinks that a big farm is too big. And then they need to work out whether they can pay for the small farm, because the small farm is becoming generally less efficient at using those resources as well as it could.
We can make the case quite clearly that people should be prepared to pay the true cost of producing food in a sustainable, environmentally friendly way. How do we balance that with the needs as well, to ensure that some of our most deprived communities can afford to eat good, healthy local food?
At my heart, it's how do we protect the most vulnerable people in society. I am providing food for everyone, not just the elite. And I can do it to the same standards that my grandfather did when he only had 12 cows. In fact, with all the knowledge and the research out there, I can do it better, as we should. And I hope that in 20 years' time, I'll be doing it even better again. So I understand people getting nervous about scale, but you need to look a little bit more below the surface just to try and understand why we do what we do. And it's very good that people keep asking these questions, because it makes sure that we do keep responding to the changing needs of society, but more importantly, the changing needs of, if it's livestock, the changing needs of the animals as well.
Do you think it's a problem that too much is seen as a matter of accounting, profit and loss, and we perhaps need, as a society, to start to move towards looking at different ways of measuring things as well? It's not all just about GDP. You touched earlier upon the importance of community, and that is vital. We can't just walk away from communities. We need to work together in our communities, across sectors, to help get the changes that we need. Despite
the value that we create for society, we're a small group of people. We're a minority group as farmers in the UK. And it's very hard then to have your voice heard. I think on top of that, there are so many generations removed from farming now. When someone goes out to buy food, they don't think really about where it's come from. Doesn't really matter. Should it? I'm not sure. But what are the consequences if you go into a shop one day and the food that you really want isn't there because there's been a global crisis in the world, home production hasn't been in good shape for a few years, so it hasn't bothered to produce it for you anyway, you haven't managed to import it. If you let down society by not providing your own homegrown food, what are the consequences?